Marina, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. I'm Andrea Goethals, the manager of digital preservation at the library. And Peter Chan gave us a really good overview of the whole life cycle of email archiving. In this session, we're going to take a deeper dive into one part of that life cycle, which is the preservation of email. Our first speaker is going to join us from Zoom, and is Joel Simpson, who works at Artifactual Systems. He's worked on digital preservation with Artifactual Systems for several years. He's worked on several projects that involve the preservation of email, including being a member of the task force on technical approaches for email archives. Joel is going to present, and then we're going to take questions from the room directly after he presents. So be thinking in your mind what you might want to ask him. Thanks, Joel. We'll give it over to you.
I'm hoping that's a yes, and that you can see my slides. So I'm Joel Simpson. Thanks for the introduction. I'm here to talk about a project that I'm currently working on that is exploring how we could archive email using the PDF ecosystem of standards, technologies, and vendors. As Andrea said, I'm going to try and keep this my talking to sort of 20 minutes and leave some time for questions and comments. I would love to hear what people think. I will just give a little bit of background to this project and how this came about. And then I'll touch on challenges in email archiving and some of the challenges with existing formats. I'm hoping that a lot of your other speakers will have already spoken about that, or you'll get a chance to hear more about those over the rest of your day. So I'm not planning to spend too much time there because I think actually the next section is kind of interesting, the why PDF, because it's not necessarily the first thing that might spring to mind for a way to improve how we do email archiving, or certainly that wasn't my first reaction when I first heard of it. So we'll then get into kind of what we're doing right now in our project, which is looking at what would the requirements for email archiving in PDF look like. So I'll describe that a little bit, and then just give some context to sort of where this project is and where it would need to go for this to come to fruition and actually happen in the real world. So a bit of background about the project. It did kind of start. A lot of the current project members, or certainly a number of them, were also on the project that Andrea mentioned, the Future of Email Archives, or the Task Force on Technical Approaches to Email Archives, which produced that report, which was funded by the Mellon Foundation and the Digital Preservation Coalition to really look across the whole cultural heritage sector and find out what the current best practices were and what the challenges were. And came up with, documented a lot of those and came up with a number of different recommendations for ways forward. And Mellon, the Mellon Foundation continued to be interested in supporting those endeavors and has funded a few follow-on projects as a result, one of which was this project. And the official title is the Conversion Criteria and Requirements for Archiving Email into PDF Containers. It's well, I'll get into kind of how it came about, but it's somewhat opportunistic in a way. It's both looking at how PDF as a technical solution could be used, as the ability to be a complex container object that can store email, but it's also about the standards and vendor ecosystem that goes around with PDF. I will say that one of the things we experienced on the task force in 2017-18 was we had there also some really wide participation from both industry, academia, government, and that included participation from Google as well as Microsoft. And while they contributed, the individuals involved contributed certainly to project into the report, we made very little traction with Google or Microsoft in helping to sort of solve the preservation challenge behind email. So when we look at PDF, I'll talk a bit about why that's a slightly different ecosystem and a different sort of avenue to explore when working with industry. So challenges. I'll just touch briefly, as I said, on the sort of high-level challenges of email archiving. Hopefully, a lot of these are sort of familiar. There's a ton of personally identifying or sensitive information that you have to deal with in email. There's this huge, variety or mixed use of email that presents many challenges for appraisal and selection. There's an obvious scale problem in that there's just so much email. There's the complexity of it as a born digital object. That emails are often not things just in themselves. They're kind of within accounts or folders or threads. They can themselves then embed attachments. They have linked content. So it's not one thing exactly. And then finally, there's also thinking about email as data. There's a lot of institutions that are kind of, given the volume of it, the potential for research across wide collections or corpus of email is huge, but that presents with it a whole set of challenges about how to, given all of the above, how to collect those as data sets and be able to work with them. So what's wrong with current formats? I mean, there's a sort of, it's a mixed bag of current formats that are, there's not a huge number of them, lots of common ones. You see a lot of PSD files from Microsoft. Mbox is an old Unix standard that's still used in many places. And then there are those are both container formats that can include whole collections of email. You also have individual email formats like EML and MSG, and they all they suffer from several problems. I mean, one is sort of quality of documentation and how well we understand what's in them and how much we can accurately or consistently get what's in them out. There's also some gaps in metadata. That's probably less true for when you think about email for the purpose of sending an email. Emails actually benefits from really very rich structured metadata that many things don't have. But all of that was designed very much with the purpose of sending and receiving emails. So when I talk about gaps, I'm thinking more about the fact that your common formats aren't telling you, what software this email came from, or what account it relates to, or other information like that. And then just touching on individual email formats are sort of problematic. They're not problematic. EML, you could argue, is the sort of truest representation of the closest thing to the RFC standards for email. But individual email as an object, exporting that is a kind of problematic because we tend not to look at email as an individual message and are looking at larger collections. And similarly, container objects can have lots of challenges with embedded objects and so on. So I'll move on to then, given all of that, why would we start thinking about PDF as a possible solution or alternative? So there are a number of interesting things here. I mean, one is that there is an existing market. So there are lots of tools already that export, you can export, email, either take from email systems or, export into PDF. And they're, what we've seen is that they're largely inadequate today, but it does show you that the vendors produce the tools. And So, that's kind of important to, if you want to try and get traction with the market and change how these original formats get produced. You need a market that's there, and you need vendors that would be interested or might see some benefit to actually thinking about this. So there's a large vendor ecosystem for Google for PDF, all the way from very large vendors like Microsoft and Google and Adobe to lots of smaller vendors doing all sorts of things. And there's a number of tools around email themselves that are part of that broader PDF ecosystem as it is. You also have an association, a not-for-profit association that kind of can help as an entry to being able to engage with all that vendor ecosystem. It's a not-for-profit that has 160 plus members in it. It's also a steward for open standards development. So there are several versions of PDF and flavors of PDF, PDF-A, PDF-UA, that have evolved, and each of those also have improving versions. And so, that's really important as the technology in the world doesn't stand still, and we can constantly be improving, and we kind of seeing that actively being supported and cultivated by the PDF Association. Technical fit to requirements. I mean, there are a number of shortfalls in older versions of PDF. If you want to think of them as container object for something complex like email. But the newer generation of PDF standards provide much greater support. They're much more open. They're patent-free. There are a number of things to be said about them. They are, relatively complex specifications, but on the other hand, also much simpler than many of the alternatives. And there's also a thing about PDF in that there is this just huge range of existing technology and support for the standard. So you have other features, annotations or redaction or things like that are not necessarily unique to email, but have a great potential for sort of fitting into an overall solution. So that's sort of why, I guess I just want to come back to the why PDF. I mean, that really just sets the scene for why we think this is an interesting solution for email archiving, in that while you might, from first principles, sort of dream up a brand new specification saying email should be stored in a whatever kind of email specific container object. The reality is it's hard to convince the Googles and Microsofts of the world to engage or get interested in that. We can work with the PDF world. So part of it is about that fit and opportunity to move some of the preservation challenge upstream to where email is actually being captured, and not treating it purely as something that we deal with sometime later when we get them in the archives. So we're currently working on a report that would just sort of set out the requirements for email archiving, and we've trying to take a relatively not be describe requirements in relatively neutral terms and not leap to the solution for each of these things, although it's obviously happening within the broader context of using PDF. But the requirements we come up with are broken into 4 basic areas. I mean, first of all, there's a thing about open standards for ensuring interoperability, ensuring greater adoption and support, leading to better quality of standards and therefore quality of tooling to support and use those standards. And we're also looking at metadata schemas as well, and thinking about how we can fit a lot of the metadata that you get in email, or could you be using to describe email, into standard schemas. For capturing email, there's a general principle of capturing everything is good, and then trying to figure out how to weed out what you don't want later. You do need to kind of support exceptions ultimately because of all the issues with sensitive information, private information, mixed use of email. So that's a complicated area. But fundamentally, describing is what are all the parts of email that you need to capture. It includes sort of core email data, metadata, but also embedded file streams and attachments and all the rest. So describing email is really about metadata, and this is an area where we think, by having tools that can capture, that can export directly from email systems into PDF is where we can get the most improvement in the quality and quantity of metadata that we capture. Having more information about the scope of email that is collected, like was this on a whole account or some subset, a date range, recording exclusions that are made at the time of export, some of the provenance information, like what systems did this come from, when was it created, by who was it created. Digital signatures is one of those things that is a sort of existing technology that can be leveraged. PDF already supports that, so it's possible to sign PDF to help improve determining authenticity later. Clearly not useful all of the time or appropriate all the time, but one of those things that's there and maybe useful in many cases. And then finally, there's sort of presenting email and looking at what do you show on a page. And this is of greater or lesser importance, I think, depending on context. This, for instance, one of the members of our project team, Cal Lee, is leading the RATOM project that's looking at email as data and using machine learning techniques to analyze and interpret large collections of email. He's not all that interested in how it gets presented on the page because he's thinking of it as data and interested more in the earlier requirements as a container object. But on the other hand, PDF is also a widely adopted, hugely supported tool for rendering pages, and so there are some interesting ways that you can do that. We have to consider in all of this sort of legacy PDF readers. So many, there's a huge number of PDF readers. I don't know, an Apple Viewer, things on your phone, all sorts that conform to older versions of the PDF standards, and then with the potential that you can do with newer standards, whether that's PDF2 or whether that's a new, based more on this type of specification. So for next steps, I mean, where are we? We're right now, basically, our little sort of mini project to start with is really just about publishing a draft report, trying to explain this rationale and what these requirements would be. We're going to hope to publish it by this week, but we're not quite there yet, in the next couple of weeks. And then invite comment and discuss it with the wider community and see what people think, and then produce a final report. And then from that, what's envisioned is a phase 2 project that would actually develop a standard for email archiving with PDF, where we're sort of calling EA PDF. And that really gets into the detail of how you'd implement such a thing. So that really does sort of map to the specific technologies and parts of the standard that are already in PDF, XMP for metadata, for instance, or how embedded file streams are supported and all of those kinds of things. Beyond that, then you still need some, you'd need tools for creating this. So this is about working with the vendor community to kind of go, can we encourage, incentivize them to update existing software, create new tools that would actually write EA PDF compliant files. That's kind of a critical success factor to the whole vendor, to the whole idea. And so clearly part of the path forward is ensuring that there is actually enthusiasm and support for doing that. Finally, once you have them, there's developing tools for processing or reading those email archives. As I said, there's a certain amount we can expect from legacy PDF tools, sort of right out of the box, but you're not going to get everything that you could do with a complex container format like that. So, and particularly if you think about it, all the things you can do in an inbox with sorting and searching and filtering, options like that. So that's pretty much my my quick overview there. I just want to check in and see if oh, there we go. I can see myself now. Yeah, so I guess I just open it up for questions.
Thank you, Joel. That was really interesting. I'm sure that we probably do have some questions in the room. So we have a microphone we're going to pass around if anybody would like to ask some questions.
Hi, Justin. Sorry if you addressed this and I've missed it, but you mentioned that legacy and current email formats like Inbox, PST, EML capture email at different levels of aggregation. What sort of level of aggregation are you looking at with PDF as a solution?
So we're sort of not ruling out. I think we're trying to say it could be entirely open. There are clearly some limits to how much stuff you want to put into one container object, but they're relatively largish limits with PDF. So I don't think there's any reason that we're not trying to say you shouldn't produce one email per PDF, but we are kind of gearing it more towards collections and treating it as a container object, and that helps with. I think that that helps a lot with email tends to come in collections, certainly at a minimum in some number of folders and inbox, a sent box, etc. And so it sort of makes sense to treat it that way. And PDF provides a whole bunch of different ways that you can capture the original order and the structure and retain a lot of the metadata that you get straight out of your email systems.
Thank you. That was very interesting. So am I right in gathering that you're talking about this as a collection of emails for an individual person, not scaling up to an organizational level, and therefore there's issues about, if you were to take this approach in an organization, about linking between different collection emails and threads and so on, and how those get passed around within an organization. You're only really looking at this from the perspective of capturing and archiving the emails of an individual.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and I really know what off the top of my head. I can't really say what the kind of scale limits are to how much you can put into PDF. Certainly, I've heard in the course of doing this project that there are people doing PDFs with literally like millions of pages. So I've heard that there is potential for scale. I don't know how realistic that is. We're not. I think our expectations that a very common use case is that you often want to capture email at a kind of email account level, and that's currently what a lot of current practice is. But we're not trying to. I think there are many cases where you'd want more mixed collections and so on, and the issue really is more one of how much does it make sense to put into one container object like that, because an individual email account, I mean, we see many examples with tens of thousands of emails and thousands of attachments, and that just in and of itself becomes a very large thing. So if you tried to do a whole department in an institution or something like that, that would get really big really quickly. So I'll just, while you were thinking through any other questions there, I mean, I guess I would add, I don't think I mentioned, but I think one of the other things I think we've talked a bit about in our draft report is that we're also not trying to suggest that this is the definitive solution to archiving email. I think there are, recognizing there's a huge number of different contexts in the kind of institutions that want to collect and preserve email. And so, there'll be lots of cases where with the right capture, appraisal, selection, and preservation practices, you work around a lot, you mitigate and solve a lot of the problems that you get with existing email formats. But at the same time, not all, there are lots of small institutions that don't have the capabilities and the capacity and the time to deal with all of that at any real scale. And so there are a lot of cases where this would make a lot of sense. It's also, sort of an interesting PDF kind of presents this opportunity. If you think of it in preservation terms, for those that are familiar with the ideas of, those OAS ideas of, you have a submission information package and an archival information package and a dissemination information package. A PDF container really could be any of those things. And so it is a slightly confounding sort of idea to think about, like, which contexts should it be a SIP or an APE or a DIP? So it's still this is to me, this is a really pragmatic and interesting and kind of innovative way of kind of engaging with industry to try and think about how we can better capture foreign digital content kind of at source. But it is definitely because there's so much there already with PDF. It does make it a challenging, hard thing to sort of get your head around how it would actually be used.
Hi, Joel. I've got a question. I'm just wondering if you have a time frame for phase 2, which is the development of an ISO standard.
Yeah, so I think that realistically that's sort of would take the rest of 2020. There is at the moment, we're sort of debating the alignment, whether it's a requirement or what's the alignment with existing standards for PDFA. For instance, PDFA version 4 is kind of in progress and won't come out until the end of 2020. And also just the specification process takes a long time. They're complex documents to write. The standards process is quite rigorous, as I understand it. Sort of follows that W3C model of you've got to have 2 independent implementations that sort of prove that it works before you finally approve the standard and so on. So, this is early days. It would take, if this, you might get an early draft and start to get some proof of concept kind of software by the end of 2020, but realistically, I don't think we would expect to see anything real hitting the market until for at least a year or 2.
I have a question for you, Joel. Have you had any early engagement with vendors to get an indication if they'd be willing to modify their software to comply with the standard?
Yes, quite a bit. I mean, first of all, we have Duff Johnson, who's the head of the PDF Association, who's on our project and is a very active member and is very excited about it. He's a great advocate for that and sort of channel to the wider community. They have regular conferences, so they'll have a conference in April, and he'll be taking this idea out and finding out what the vendors think about it. So I expect to find out more after that. We also have Matthew Hardy, who's a senior engineer at Adobe, who's worked with Duff a lot on a lot of the specifications, is just quite an expert in the intricacies of PDF. And so obviously has a good feel for, I don't think, not making any promises on in advance of a thing actually, a specification actually existing or whatever. But the fact that Adobe has provided his time to help support us in this, to me, is a kind of good indication.
Any other questions? Okay, so let's thank Joel for joining us, spending his evening with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we're going to follow that up with a perspective from Australia. We have Eva Samaras, who has worked in the Australian archive sector since 2013 and is currently the Victorian Electronic Records Strategy Senior Officer at Public Record Office Victoria. She is presently undertaking a PhD in her part-time, right, at the University of Technology, Sydney, to explore how computer-generated imagery projects produced by the film and television visual effects industry can be archived and preserved for future use.
Thank you for that introduction, Andrea. Yes, as Andrea said, my name is Avanthia Samaras, and I'm here from Public Record Office Victoria. Today I'll be presenting about a project that we've just recently started to try and work out a solution for managing email records. And this is managing, trying to come up with a solution for a very large-scale problem. It's my hope that over the next day or so, and by meeting some of you in this room and hearing from the other speakers, that we can get some valuable advice and guidance about how we can start to develop a practical solution for the significant challenge of managing email. So this is really great timing for us. Okay, so this is an overview of what I'll be covering today. So I'll just start by talking a little bit about my background, although I just had a nice introduction from Andrea. And a little bit about Public Record Office Victoria. Some of you may not know who we are. And I'll talk a bit about the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy. Then for the most of the talk, I'll talk about the project that we're just starting, the email pilot project. So I'll talk about the background to the project, including the problems that we're trying to address. I'll mention a bit about a proof of concept that we did a couple of years ago, which tested an e-discovery tool. And then I'll talk about what the new project aims to do, including the research questions that we'd like to explore. And I'll go through an outline of the tasks that we'd like to complete as part of the project and what we've done so far to date, which unfortunately isn't as much as I was hoping we would have done by now, but that's okay. And then I'll talk about some of the long-term outcomes and benefits of the project if everything goes to plan. So here we go. Introduction. Let's start with introduction. So Andrea already kind of mentioned my background, so I'll just skip through most of this. I've been at PROV for about 5 years now as the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy Officer, which basically means I work on projects related to digital record keeping and digital preservation. And I've also previously worked at the ABC and at RMIT Design Archives. As Andrea mentioned, I'm currently doing my PhD at UTS, which is with the Animal Logic Academy and the Faculty of Engineering and IT, in an area that's very, very different to this problem. So email is something I'm not an expert in, so it's very exciting to be here and learn about some of these challenges and undertake a project because it's something that's relevant for all archives and libraries. I'm also the Australian content editor for Archival's online magazine, which is a free resource, kind of in a blog format. So if you're interested, check it out online. Okay, so about PROV. PROV's a Victorian state government archive. We were established in 1973 under the Public Records Act, and we hold records dating back to the 1830s. We're located at the Victorian Archive Centre in North Melbourne, and our collection and reading room is located in the same building. We also share this site with the National Archives of Australia's Victoria branch. We've been actively transferring digital records since our first digital archive was implemented in the early 2000s. So this year, though, we'll be launching a brand new digital archive, which is a major piece of work, and it's probably the biggest project we've done since probably the first archive was implemented. And this involves implementing a whole new suite of systems, including a new archival management system. So I'm not sure why we're doing multiple projects at the same time, but David, my boss, was really keen to get onto this email thing, so we're doing that as well as everything else. We actually do have emails in custody already. We have done quite a few email transfers over the years, but they're mainly related to Royal Commission transfers, and we haven't really been actively transferring other large email collections, but we do have some in custody. This is a simple diagram of our organisational structure at Public Record Office, focusing on our department, Government Services. So my boss, David Brown, is the Assistant Director of Government Services, and he's here at the Symposium. David, do you want to wave? There we go. So a few of us in Government Services will be working on the email project. So my role on the project is mainly managing documentation around the outcomes and the testing of the different tools that we'll be using, and communications. Okay, this is kind of my job. So the email project is in support of the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy, or VERS for short. So the latest version of the strategy is published on our website, which outlines our goals and actions for 2018 to 2021. VERS is about ensuring the creation, capture and preservation of authentic, complete and meaningful digital records by the Victorian public sector, and that includes email records. But to date, we haven't been doing a great job of it. Also at the bottom of the screen, you may have noticed some Twitter handles. So if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at CyberKeyface. And you can also follow Prov Record Keeping at prov_RKS. Okay, so now for the rest of the talk, I'll jump into a bit of information about the project that we've started. So I'll start with the background. So the problem that we're trying to tackle. So since the 1990s, Victorian Government has used IBM's Lotus Notes email application as our primary communication medium, both internally and externally. The operation and storage of Lotus Notes emails is managed by our IT service provider, which is called Senitex. And so like any other email system, key actions and decisions of public officers are captured in email, and it's our primary repository for government records. Yet the email at the moment is quite difficult to access. It's in the proprietary format, so IBM's Lotus Notes is in a NSF format, which isn't really easy to access and use, which is posing a risk for government because there could be quite a gap in documented memory of Victoria. So basically, not everybody's transferring emails to us, and not every single department is managing emails consistently. While most of us are using the email Senitex service provider, it's not really managed in a way that the information is findable, as I'll go into in the next slide. So over 20 years of routine backup has resulted in a backlog of over 67,000 LTO tapes and 28 petabytes of email. Now, I have to say, these figures were from an audit that we did in 2014, so these numbers are going to be a lot higher now. And this is why David's pushing this project. Emails may be deemed records under the Public Records Act and shouldn't be deleted without an assessment of ongoing value. But the volume is so large that manual review and sentencing is clearly not feasible. So as an example, back in 2011, Senitex was not actually able to meet a Freedom of Information request. They had to argue in the Victorian Civil and Administration Tribunal that they could not possibly justify the resources or the expense to meet the request, as it would require a review of 1.5 million emails, which was estimated to take 241 weeks of full-time processing. And that was just one request. So to complicate things, Victorian Government's currently in the process of moving to Office 365 and Outlook. So, and some of the agencies and departments have already moved away from Lotus Notes. So what are we going to do with this big backlog of Lotus Notes emails? So the project is hoping to try and address this and hopefully present the same thing happening when we move to Outlook. So we did a proof of concept in 2017-18 to test a commercial e-discovery tool on a set of emails. The project mainly focused on disposal and deduplication functions. We tested the tool across 4.6 million emails from a single Victorian government department. And while I say we, much of the proof of concept tasks were actually completed by a specialist from the company that produces the tool. And we also had a contractor employed to manage the project for us. So this proof of concept explored the ways that we could clean up and reduce the large email collections by removing low value content. So we found the tool could handle processing large collections quite well. And I don't believe we had a system that was spec'd out at a quite a high level. I think it was pretty much just a normal setup. So we found that another bonus of the e-discoveries tool is that it could actually ingest NSF format and didn't have to do any conversions prior. So it would accept the Lotus Notes format, which was great. And we found that running the standard dedupe function reduced the sample by 43%. And then we were able to reduce an additional 7% by excluding emails from domains that were not government work related, such as footing tipping sites, which is quite popular in Victoria. Okay, so now I'll talk a bit about what we're hoping to explore in this new email pilot project. So the new project, which we'll be doing this year, will aim to develop an end-to-end machine-assisted solution to appropriately appraise, dispose, and hopefully transfer emails. So by that I mean we're thinking about how we can create a workflow that will probably use a combination of tools, probably including ePad, to help address and reduce these large volumes. So this time we're going to just analyse a corpus of online emails from our organisation, 2016 to, I think it's 2019, I don't think we've got 2020 emails, it's about 500 gigs. So we're not going to address the emails on the LTO tapes yet, but we're just going to sort of focus on developing the workflow first, and then hopefully we can get some funding and start looking at some of the tapes. So we're going to do some more testing with the e-discovery tool that we used in the proof of concept, because we kind of need to document it a little bit more and hopefully compare it against some other tools as well. And we'll be doing a lot of this stuff ourselves, so we're going to be a bit more hands-on this time. And we are keen to test some other tools, so please let me or David know in the break if you've got some recommendations. That would be great. Preferably open source, because we don't have a lot of money to spend. So this is the approach in a nutshell. So we're not quite sure if we will achieve sufficient appraisal outcomes as part of this project, but the whole point of the project is to explore what can be achieved now with available technologies, because we can't really keep waiting. So this is an overview of some of the key questions that we'd like to explore as part of the project. If possible, we'd like to test some of these using more than one tool. So we're keen to sort of see which tools have the means to convert NSF email format to do bulk conversions, because we realise not everything will actually be able to review NSF format. Which tools have the potential to clean, analyse and appraise? What deduplication functions are available and how do these compare? Can analysis and appraisal processes actually be conducted across email threads as opposed to individual emails? And can appropriate rules be applied to identify non-record long-term, temporary and permanent value emails? So that's the key one. So can we actually do appraisal across large collections using tools? So here's an overview of the main steps of the project. At the moment, we're up to about step 5, doing tests with the e-discovery tool, but we want to explore some of these steps using different tools as well. We have already found that just setting up a designated environment for our team to test the e-discovery tool has taken a lot longer than expected. So Cenetex has taken months just to get the virtual machine set up, to get the software installed and to assign our team access. So I was hoping to report, we'll be a bit further along so I could report a little bit more. And I guess the main thing is with this project is that we really want to explore the appraisal and disposal options, and if we get some good outcomes, then we'll be looking at doing a transfer. Like I said, we've already transferred email records before, and we have pretty good digital workflows for converting large collections of digital records. So we have the Victorian Electronic Record Strategy has a VO, VERS Encapsulated Object format, which is like a container. And our latest standard for VERS enables and supports multi-level and large collections to be encapsulated in objects. So we would like to do some tests about the intellectual arrangement of email collections, as was posed in the last talk. So do we collect an entire organisation? Do we collect individual accounts? What does that look like inside their VO? What kind of metadata do we need? So we might end up doing a little bit of that, even if we feel we haven't got the best appraisal outcomes, just so we can sort of start experimenting. So here's some initial testing that we've done. So just going back to looking at what the e-discovery tool could do. So our technical specialist, Andrew Waugh, did some processing a couple of weeks ago, and he just grabbed a single year's worth of emails, which was about 79 accounts, 57.4 gigabytes, which was 250,000 emails in NSF format. So he ran the simple deduplication function that's built into the e-discovery tool, and the collection was reduced to 142,634 emails after deduping. So that was pretty good. And it was completely in line with what we got in the previous proof of concept, which was good. So it affirmed what we suspected, and that the tool's quite good at doing dedupe and it's consistent. It also aligns to what our consultant who works with this tool recommends, that he suggests that usually the level of duplication is about 30 to 50%. So that aligns to that as well. So far we're kind of on the right track. So this slide is to give you a little bit more about information about how the deduplication function works. This is not my area of expertise, I have to say, but hopefully it makes sense. And if you've got some more specific questions about this, I might be able to forward them to our technical specialists and get back to you via email. So MD5 hashes are often referred to as a digital fingerprint for electronic data. So on the left, I've attempted to show how using MD5 algorithms tends to work. But the thing with emails is that they can be a bit more complicated than other forms of electronic data, as two emails that appear to have the same content may not share the same binary stream. And because of this, the tools like we used creates its own MD5 hash algorithm, and it does this by referring to multiple parts of the email, as I've outlined on the right. So it's kind of a proprietary algorithm, like different tools use it, but the one that this tool uses is quite good. So we're hoping to play around a little bit more with the dedupe function and sort of understand a little bit more about how it works and if there's any parameters to kind of configure it. And then after we sort of played around with the dedupe, we really wanted to start workshopping how we can reduce the set in other ways. So like the domain stuff that I talked about before, if there's any way to filter out stuff that's clearly not government related, like emails about, lunch breaks, cake in the tea room, that kind of thing, if there's any ways that we can get rid of some of that, that would be good. And then we can hopefully reduce the collection to a point where then we can focus on the appraisal and decision making. So we've got quite a few steps to go, and we're really keen to sort of try and do some testing with a lot of different tools if possible, to try and work out what how we can sort of do it in a bulk fashion and try and be practical about it. Obviously, sensitivity is another issue that we'll have to deal with as well, but it sounds like there's some good EPAD and potentially some other tools have some good functionalities in place that will help us with that. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about the potential project outcomes if everything goes to plan. Big if. So if we can achieve a practical and efficient end-to-end solution, one of the big things, which is the big one for us, is that we can finally move away from LTO as the email source because it's not working. So if Senatex wants to back things up to email, that's onto LTO tapes, that's fine. But we need to have some workflows in place to potentially extract the email before that happens for analysis and potential transfer. So we want to work with Victorian government departments and agencies to help us roll out some email appraisal, disposal and transfer activities. And then we want to convert the permanent value emails into VOs, which is our approved long-term preservation format. So this will ensure that our email records will be protected and preserved over time. And considering we'll have a brand new digital archive, we'll be able to provide the ongoing access and preservation that this requires. So that's pretty much my presentation in a nutshell. I believe we'll do the question time after the next presentation. So thank you.
Our third presenter, our last presenter for this session is Jan Huta, who is a digital preservation analyst at Archives New Zealand. He is responsible for ensuring processes are in place to maintain the integrity of the government digital archive, including digital preservation policy and strategy, research into digital preservation risks and challenges, preparation and ingest of digital transfers, and administration of the format library. Thank you, Jan.
Hello, everyone. On this one, we should start at the beginning, I guess. What do I do? Oh. Okay, so I'm going to talk about experience we have with emails at Archives New Zealand, which is going to be a little bit different to what we have just heard from Prof. I'm going to cover a little bit about digital transfers as they are happening at Archives New Zealand at the moment. Then I will shortly talk about what we have seen in this email topic so far. And then I will describe one use case we had to deal with last year. So digital transfers at Archives New Zealand. As you know, the Public Record Act from 2005 talks about about responsibility of Archives New Zealand to deal with records in any form, including digital. Hence, we need to deal with digital transfers. There was a government digital project, government digital archive program happening between 2010 and 2014, which ended up with establishing the government digital archive. And then the next step for us was to figure out how do we deal with digital transfers. We're still trying to figuring it out, but we have opened the door and we are accepting officially digital transfers since 2016. Before, we have done few legacy transfers which we have accepted in the past without having any possibility to preserve them or deal with them in any reasonable manner. But we actually use them for testing the transfer process. And since then, we have done few digital transfers with different agencies like CAA, IRD, ERO, and we have about 5 different transfers on the table at the moment at certain stage of progress. If you are a newsletter agency and you are interested in digital transfer, you can find all of the guidelines and how-tos on our website. How does it work? It's really just a discussion process with the agency. If the agency shows or express an interest in digital transfer, we have a discussion with them and say, this is our, we have simple requirements, and I have to say, we have changed those requirements few times, so they are really minimal, and they put minimal load on the agency. then we usually get the test set of transfer data from the agency just for us to see what's the structure, if the metadata we or the agency is able to provide is something we can work with. If all of these things get a go, then we have a transfer plan and we get a whole digital transfer set, which we run through processes and analysis internally. So we're trying to find broken files, empty folders, duplicates, all the problematic things with file formats, files with wrong extension, and all these things. So then we go back to the agency and say, hey, so you gave us this, let's say 20,000 files, and we have found a few hundreds with these issues. What do you have a different copy, or what do we do? Then after this discussion, we ended up with something which we call distilled set. I really like the idea of kind of imagining we have this original set and then we distill it into something nice. And that actually will end up in the Government Digital Archive eventually, where we actually preserve it and provide access to those files if they are not restricted. So what I'm going to talk about is really that green part on the right side, where Archives New Zealand is preparing and dealing with the digital transfers and with the files with the ultimate goal of preserving them. Of course, we do provide advice to agencies, so we do have also kind of we do also do work on with government agencies in advice and go kind of taking them through the digital transfer. But in my team, or actually in the team which I'm in, that's the green part on the right. Just a little bit about digital archive we have. We are using Rosetta Digital Preservation System by Ex Libris since 2012. We do share one instance of this system with the library. So, and that's the system which allows us to provide long-term preservation for digital content. When I say digital, means digitized and born digital as well. It's in use since 2012. I believe that the first ingest happened in late January 2012, and this is the current numbers. So we have almost 8.5 million individual files in digital archive, which is 577,000 records, but only 33,000 of that whole number is born digital items or born digital files. So you can see that the disproportion is still big, so it's mostly digitized, and we are trying to get more digital transfers to happen. So what we have seen in the email land, because we're dealing with either legacy transfers or normal digital transfers, they are usually either exports from EDRMS systems, or sometimes it happens that there is no EDRMS system at the agency and they give us kind of a copy of a shared drive, hard drive, or whatever drive. So it's not like we are dealing with a collection of emails on a daily basis. We only had that one example, which I'm going to discuss later on. But the emails we see are really part of the exports from EDRMS systems. And they are usually really interesting, and because they are, I mean, it's very obvious that the people who actually do save emails into EDRMS systems or shared drives, they are very often, it's obvious that they don't know what they are doing. I mean, I don't. Maybe there is a better way how to say this, but that's what it is. Strangely enough, when we do our analysis of digital transfers, it's usually files which happen to be emails in the past, which kind of pops out with wrong extensions, with any different sorts of problems like wrong file format. And it's usually then when you open the file, you see, oh, it's actually someone who copied an email, like text from that email into the Word document, and then changed the extension into TXT, things like that. So, and only then we kind of realized it used to be a proper email before. So we fix these things, so we actually do have a proper file format and information, so we can use it for preservation actions later on. The extra example is, have you ever tried to save individual email in Microsoft Outlook as a HTML website? The option is strangely there, and it works, but what it does, it creates, I believe, it creates HTML file and then 2 XML files in an extra folder. And those 2 XML files usually keep the attachment if there is any information about the background of your email, if there was some. So when we see this, then we need to kind of make sense of, okay, what are these XML files? Do they actually have some extra information to that email? Usually they don't, because the government emails, they tend to be really easy, just text. There is no images, nothing. So that's our experience with emails. It's really just a random experience, I would say. Till last year. Last year we faced the first email-only digital transfer. It was kind of urgent transfer, and we accepted it as it was. It was an mbox file with 315, I believe, emails in it. And that's what we got. There was no metadata coming with it. So we really just received that mbox, and the fact that we had no metadata meant things that we would need to kind of create some metadata out of it. So, for example, one of the decisions was, okay, so because we need to, if we ever need to populate items from these emails, we will use the subject of that email as an item title, because there is nothing else to use. So, at that point, there was interesting discussion between us, the digital preservation analysts, and the transfer archivist, because when we discussed, okay, so what do we do with this mbox? So the digital preservation analyst point of view was, well, it's an mbox. It is a collection of emails. So we ingest that mbox, and then we figure out if and what kind of digital access the derivatives or user copy we need, either for the whole thing or for individual emails. So the first idea was ingest just the mbox as a preservation master. That's it. The other idea was mbox as the preservation master, and then individual emails, split it into individual emails, and use it as a modified master. And then maybe next step would be create derivative copies of those individual emails, so people can actually see and read those emails. Fun fact: this transfer was completely restricted and still is. So it was like a discussion for what if this was open. Anyway, so all email, if we go with any of these options, we would keep it as a collection. So that mbox or that item in Rosetta would be one item. So there would be no possibility or difficult. It would be difficult to describe individual emails if that was ever needed. But from the preservation point of view, it would be probably the most clear or clean solution, because that's what we got, or what we received. We got one file and we preserve it as a one file. Whoop! What was that? That was a. Yeah, I think this was my the option I would prefer. But the archivists had different ideas, and we ended up doing the following thing. We submitted that mbox as one item, and then at the same time we split it into different emails and ingested every single email as a preservation master again. The idea behind this was kind of thinking about the description system we have, Archway. It would be possible to present individual emails in the search and describe them as well. It would be better for search. So it happened this way. From the preservation point of view, we were worried, thinking, well, we ingest this as a preservation master, but it actually is not preservation master, because that mbox is the master we got. So at least for someone in the kind of trying to investigate what the hell happened in the future, we ingested all the individual emails with a something we call provenance node, which kind of explains what happened. So it says this file was extracted from original mbox file with a tool. So when we got this collection, what have we done? Transfer archivists, they wanted to see and go through all those emails to see if they actually are records and if there is anything sensitive. The immediate idea was like, yeah, we just read them, because it was 300 emails, so it would take you really not a long time to go through them. Obviously not possible if it was 300,000 emails. So we had to find a simple mbox viewer, which was easy to do. From the digital preservation analyst point of view, there was a little bit more to do, because it was our first collection of emails in email-related file format. So we had to figure out what are the suitable file formats for preservation of emails. How do we split that mbox into individual emails, and how do we extract metadata out of that thing, so we can actually populate some metadata in Archway, which is our description system. We went through few standards and publications, which some of them were already mentioned by Peter this morning. Really useful one is the Digital Preservation Coalition Technology Watch Report, Preserving Email, first and second edition, from Chris Prom. And The Future of Email Archives, which is the book mentioned in the previous presentation, and the one before the previous one, sorry. And also the really interesting and nice and helpful guidelines from NARA and Library of Congress. So we ended up with this. We keep the mbox being widely used, recommended by both NARA and DPC. So we thought, okay, mbox is suitable for long-term preservation. The other question was what file format we use for splitting into individual images, and we chose EML for the same reasons. Quite open file format, documented, widely used, documentation is available. Other options which were on the table but we really didn't give them that much thought would be text files, HTML or XML, but then with EML we were able to keep all in one, so that email and possible attachments, because there was a lot of attachments. So from our point of view of preservation, one item instead of text file and the attachment would be easier. Of course, all the tools which we have tested for splitting, they do give you the option to extract the attachment. So then we played with few tools to address the need, which was split mbox into EML files, and possibly, because we are still worried about the fact that we ingesting those EML files as preservation masters, we really wanted those EML files to pretend they were created at the time of creation of that email. So we went through mbox viewer, EPAT, which we realized very soon it was not a thing which would help you to split mbox into something else, but was for appraisal, and we used it later on. And then a few other tools, and they do all of them do quite a lot. Usually similar things. Each of them has a like a special thing which the other tool doesn't do, but obviously. So really, it would be meaningless to describe them because your needs will be different. The winner for us was 8 for Mail, the paid version, which supports mbox files created by free email providers like Outlook, Gmail, and even some older ones. It was the only one which was actually able to allow us to create EML, which then the date of creation of that EML was date of creation of that email. So from the preservation point of view, that EML really kind of looks like it was created 2 years ago, except I created it last week, but that email was created 2 years ago. It does recreate original mailbox folders. So in our case, the extraction from the mailbox was from three folders. So it was inbox, send, and archive, I believe. So we were able to use this information for populating the metadata. And you can export all different reports into CSV, XML. You can generate different timelines, so you can actually analyze a little bit that mbox. You can extract attachments, you can export attachments, you can create PDFs out of emails, all these things. But mainly the main for us was that the EML export thing is heavily configurable. You can filter out, you can keep only text, you can do whatever you want really. So metadata we extracted by this tool and we used in the end were the information about subfolders of the mailbox, subject of the email which we use for populating the item title, information about the sender, information about the recipient, details about the attachment name, the file name, and the size. So then we were able to put description into Archway description field, which says this email was extracted from this person mailbox. It was transferred to New Zealand, ARANZ New Zealand as an mbox file, and the date of creation of this email was this, and this person has sent it to this person, and there's an attachment called battleplan.dox, which is really useful because all this context is searchable from the system. So if someone really goes to Archway and wants email from this person with this attachment, then they should be able to find it. Access of email archives. In this particular case, there is no access. It's restricted, and there's also it's something we call public view no. That means even the metadata are not available, and they are not searchable on Archway. So if you go and search for Princess Leila, you will get no results. Our digital archive, Rosetta, doesn't have any viewer for EML files, and same thing for mbox files. So, but what it does, if you actually have if you are allowed to see the content, in this case, you will be offered the option to download the EML files, and then it's still a common enough format, so you should be able to open it in your Outlook or whatever. The questions this raised was: do we need email viewers in Rosetta? Or do we create derivative copies of some sort? So if we have different collection of emails which is not restricted, are we going to give people EML files, or do we create text files, or do we create a PDF with the content of the email and wrapped attachment? Or do we use a different approach, like for example ePad does, that we actually submit and preserve that mbox, but we also use the same mbox for providing access in a reading room or online, but not directly from the digital preservation system, because as you will see if you go to the workshop tomorrow, ePad does provide the delivery layer, which can deal with mbox. So all these things are open. This was our journey, and that's where we are at. Lessons learned. Email management in agencies is always different. When I mention people don't know what they are doing when they save emails into the EDRMS system, it's not they don't know what they are doing. They know they think that email is important. They want to save it, but the way how is it done? It's really strange very often. So maybe there is some need for guidelines. Maybe there are a lot of tools for dealing, managing, and kind of playing around with emails available. As we have seen, we are going to look more into EPAT for. We see it as a maybe possible option for us to do kind of internal reappraisal if we get a email collection, but mostly what we would like to see is that the agency kind of use it and go through their emails before they send stuff to us. What you have seen is really compared to Prof fun for one day, 300 emails. But we will be in a situation sooner or later where we will need to deal with much more than 300 emails, and then this whole process will need to change anyway. And that's the end.
Thanks, Jan. These were both good examples of reality that often you don't get perfect email coming in, and could be proprietary, it could be on media that you can't deal with easily, or people could have made interesting choices for how to convert it. So, and how these two institutions are working through that regardless. Do we have any questions for either of our presenters?
Kia ora. This question is for either or both of you speakers. Do you have any examples of other state or national archives that are further along with the BAU process of transferring emails that you've kind of seen as a example of best practice to look up to? And have you been able to, if you do know of any of those, been able to connect up with them to learn from their experiences and their systems and processes?
Just through my research, NARA, who Peter mentioned, it seems to be the only ones that have a clear strategy and approach. But I haven't really extensively looked. I don't know if David, have you reached out to? National Archives UK. Yeah, I think they did a. Okay, so David said that National Archives UK have done a extensive pilot and transfer of email as well, but we haven't reached out directly to them yet, but we might do so.
Yeah, similarly, definitely NARA. They have a lot of guidelines online. TNA, I remember vividly. I was reading few things about emails and their strategy and how they deal with emails, but then I checked yesterday and they changed the website and I wasn't able to find it. But they are doing stuff, and also British Library.
Thank you both. That was really interesting. One of the things that occurred to me when you were talking about these was about preserving emails as individual records, and that's great. But like as Jan was pointing out, it's feasible to do appraisal when you're allowing 300 emails. The moment you get to 30,000 or whatever, it's simply not usable. Now, from an access perspective, that's also relevant. And I think Peter's presentation this morning showed a very good example of being able to do, say, social network analysis on emails. And so one dimension of access after they've been ingested, preserved, and catalogued and everything else is how they're made available. And I didn't pick up that either of you were having on, as part of your plan, how researchers using the archives can say do a bulk download of a data set for interrogation and research purposes of that kind of social network analysis, or you're trying to work out how policy was formulated across 3 different government agencies or whatever.
Yeah, so access hasn't been a focus of the project to date, but the way that our preservation process works is that any any collections of records that are on open access can be downloaded. In theory, researchers should be able to download the email VOs in the future and to access them. There will be issues around how we can manage the access restrictions, because no doubt there'll be a lot of a mix, so we might have to just play it safe and put it on closed access for a fixed period of time until we're able to open the record. So there may be a waiting time, and so that's the case with the Royal Commission emails that we have in custody anyway. But I guess we could experiment in ways that we could potentially put different formats within the VOs themselves. So generally we support email as a preservation format, but we could potentially also do some other exports and put them in the VOs as well. That's something we could think about for sure.
We have been thinking about it when we were dealing with that small collection, and it's really the question about do you provide access to the whole thing, so the user can go through the whole set of emails, against do you provide access to individual emails, but then you kind of losing the connection. How do you find that this email is replied to this email, which is also in the archive? So we don't have a solution to that, but we think one of the answers might be that we provided mbox for download, and so you get the whole thing. If there is a need to redact or limit certain emails from the whole collection, then I would say maybe we need to create derivative copy, again, like a redacted mbox, or maybe just a bunch of emails in some kind of accessible format, like text. Let's say text file. Let's not think about the attachments, but yeah, it's either or, I guess.
Hi, I had a question about sort of the application of machine learning in the appraisal process. In that machine learning algorithms are often referred to as a black box. They might do their job extremely efficiently and extremely well, but you're never entirely sure how that algorithm has arrived at that decision as to, in this instance, whether an email's been determined as being of high value or, business as usual. I was just wondering if you had thoughts about how you might mitigate that, or record the appraisal process, given the limits of machine learning.
We only briefly started to talk about machine learning, but in different contexts, not about emails, so I don't have anything to...
I guess that's part of this project, is to sort of try and understand how it works a little bit more, and building on some of the stuff that's already being done. I know State Archives and Records New South Wales did some tests, not with email, but with some file shares using natural language processing, just open source Python tools, which had some quite good results as well. And there was quite a bit of documentation around that. I think we wrote a paper on it that was in Archives and Manuscripts, a joint paper. But it's definitely an issue that we will have to address in some way. I believe ADRI, the Australian Digital Records Initiative, is putting together a report about the implications of using machine learning and AI as well. So it might be good to review what the report and recommendations are, to sort of work out ways that we can acknowledge and communicate what we have, if we have used tools for some of these processes. It may be the case that we're not actually comfortable with how the tool has worked, and we may not feel that we can trust the machine. That could be an outcome of the project. Either way, we're keen to sort of document this process along the way, and but that's a good point that you raise. It should be recorded as part of the transfer, if we decide to do the transfer, what processes were conducted on the email, including machine learning. So thank you.
Hi, Jan. Over here. I was read your last slide with interest and some concern about some historical practices in our organisation, and I'm just wondering, you said that possibly more guidance is needed. Is there any plan to develop more guidance around archiving emails, saving emails?
Not as far as I know, but with this discussion as we having at the moment, we might end up doing something, because it, as I said, literally in every single digital transfer, all the majority of the problematic items or files is the email, which is not an email anymore, and somehow made it into text file or Microsoft Office file, RTF. So maybe that would be a good thing to do as well, but it's not my decision really.
Yeah, that was very, very interesting. A lot of good points covered and a lot of interesting challenges. From an actual archivist point of view, one of the important aspects of an email, particularly if you relate it to the paper copy in a sense, is the provenance of, not the provenance, wrong word, the layout, making sure it's as authentic as it was when it was created. So one of the points was making sure that creation date of the file matches what it was originally. But the format and the layout of the email, so they could have some interesting fonts, particularly the very old ones, and signatures, which are also quite important. They could be images or some other unusual embedding into an email. Have you got any thoughts about how you would preserve that into the new email or whatever format you want to use for the future?
Not really. I mean, our idea and understanding of EML was that it would retain as much as possible as from the original look and feel of an email, including the attachments. So, but now when you ask, we haven't done a proper investigation into if there is a graphic or different file, different font signature, if it still looks the same. So yeah, maybe it's something we need to do as well.
So a lot of those email standards are based on the transfer. So what's transferred and not exactly what was drawn in the person's browser or client. So they will transfer things like images and embedded things, but if your browser or client is using something, bringing in its own fonts, then that's not something that would be retained in Mbox or EML.
I suppose one of the things we try to do when we do any digital transfer is to provide some information about the original system. So in the case of Lotus Notes, we might have some, as part of the series documentation, we might include some registrations around Lotus Notes itself, potentially some manuals or some screen grabs. So if the record ends up, the display of it may change, at least the researchers in the future may have an idea of what the application was like. So I think that would be an element of the transfer.
I have kind of a general, almost philosophical question about what is an email. And I want to suggest that an email is what is sent over so when the email protocol was devised, you would send data from one computer to another. And that data, to me, constitutes the email. What you see on your screen as you're composing or sending or saving or reopening or forwarding is a representation of that email, not the email. And I've just exported a .eml on my laptop to open it as a text file, and it's clearly, it carries all the metadata, the dates, the protocols, the creation software. If I open that email file in a browser, it will present as kind of an HTML display. So I guess my question is, what should we collect, and whether it's a cultural email or whether it's a record of government, a public record, where you might argue that what's important is the information in the email, not the kind of way it looks, because you can stretch a screen and the text will rewrap, so that's kind of not important. So it's a kind of a general question really about where do you start from? I'm just interested in people's general thoughts.
I always look at the digital transfer as a bunch of files, and they are in certain file formats, and they can be interpreted differently in different applications. So you're right that if we receive EML files and we open them in 3 different mail clients, they might look a little bit different, but they should still show the same number of words and characters and maybe the same coding and stuff. So so what we really preserve is the file in the first stage, but in the next stage, if we do ever a preservation action, we will be focusing on the intellectual content of that thing. So in the end, it doesn't need to be EML. It could be really if we decided all of the EMLs, the EML file format is not supported anymore, and we need to migrate it into something else, we might end up migrating it into, let's say, example, text files, and we will be losing some stuff, but what we will need to make sure is that we are not losing any intellectual content. If we are losing look and feel, that might be acceptable if the archivists do think so, but I think it's an intellectual content which we trying to preserve. The file and file format itself is just a carrier in a way. And I will probably stop here.
No, I would agree with that. And I believe we've, some of the earlier email transfers we've done may have been converted to PDF. So I guess it's also what the agency has to give us, and if anyone is in a position or has the resources to do any conversion. But often what we'll take is whatever the agency has given us, as long as it is in one of the approved long-term preservation formats, whether that's PDF or an EML. As long as it meets that criteria, I don't think we really care exactly about the look and feel at this point. But as Jan said, that these standards change over time, so it may be the case that email's the best thing now for us, but then it might change in a few years.
Hello. This isn't a question, it's just a comment. I just wanted to thank you both for your candour. So many conference presentations are sort of magnificent solutions, and it's great to hear you talk about things which are so ambiguous and contingent and uncertain and early days. So thank you very much for your frankness.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think it's about lunchtime, so could you join me in thanking all of our presenters? Okay, I think lunch is just right outside here? Okay. Yes. 1 hour. Right. Back at 1:30.